9. Democracy and Anarchy. Cynicism and moral relativism are common attitudes in our time. Vinson, as Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, asserted, quote, "Nothing is more certain in modern society than the principle that there are no absolutes." End quote. The economist Keynes observed, quote, "In the long run, we are all dead." End quote. The temper is again, après nous le déluge, a contempt for the future, so that it is, as Röpke observes, quote, "a virtue to contract debts and foolishness to save." End quote. Moreover, pornography, which in the late 18th century began its extensive influence in modern history, has flourished on a widespread scale in recent years, no longer as a vice of the aristocracy or as an aspect of political or literary illuminism, but on a democratic basis and as an organized philosophy. Public officials in prosecuting such works have seen in the main the sexual content and bluntness and attacked this without a realization of the philosophical import. But to cite but one example, Henry Miller was never more serious than when he asserted that his concern, quote, "was not with sex nor with religion, but with the problem of self-liberation." End quote. The liberation is from history, Christianity, civilization and law. A radical moral relativism goes hand in hand with every form of statism and is its instrument and concomitant. This liberation is called a battle for liberty, but this quote-unquote new definition of liberty is not liberty under law, but rather liberty from law, and it is anti-law. Every instance in history of the rise of statism has gone hand in hand with the rise of pornography. The two are closely related. To encourage the one is to further the other. Statism ultimately denies an area of transcendence and insists that man is a social animal and a creature of the state. Law is what the state says it is, so that law in its historic sense as the revealed will of God or the principle of order in nature, or as the natural and healthy environment of men and nations, is denied in favour of the naked and arbitrary will of the state. A notable and early example of this link between pornography and statism was the Marquis de Sade, who is widely revered by the modern champions of radical democracy. In its simpler form, this faith is expressed as, quote, "the will of the people," end quote. Democracy is, quote, "vox populi vox Dei," end quote. There is no standard other than the will of the people, which can include all things. It is, quote, "the people, yes," end quote. Thus, Oliver Wendell Holmes saw this concept of democracy as his predominant principle. Speaking to John W. Davis, Solicitor General of the U.S. from 1913 to 1918, Holmes once observed, with reference to the Sherman Act, quote, "Of course I know, and every other sensible man knows, that the Sherman Law is damned nonsense. But if my country wants to go to hell, I am here to help it." End quote. For Holmes, quote, "the truth was the majority votes of that nation that could lick all others." End quote. According to Brandeis, Holmes's faith was, quote, "that man should be free in a large way." He was a great liberator. He was a great emancipator. End quote. True legislation in this sense is giving the people what they want, helping them to get to hell if they so choose. And greatness, or near greatness, according to Eric F. Goldman, Princeton professor of history, is submission to the popular will, to, quote, "the inevitable flow of feeling," end quote. Lecturing at Stanford on August 8, 1962, quote, "Truman and Eisenhower," Goldman said, "will be remembered as, quote, near great," end quote, presidents, not because of anything they particularly did, but because they finally, both after quote-unquote conservative starts, had, quote, sense enough to not stand in the way of the inevitable flow of feeling in the country, end quote, end quote. However, the people, it is held, do not always know what is best for them. True democracy is sometimes not to be confused with ballot box democracy, which may reflect non-democratic ideas. Man's true freedom, moreover, involves state control over vast areas of private activity. As Walter Reuther has said, quote, "Only a moron would believe that the millions of private economic decisions being made independently of each other will somehow harmonize in the end and bring us out where we want to be." End quote. Government intervention and control is necessary. Thus, statism is born out of man's retreat from responsibility, and every retreat from responsibility is a denial of accountability and its concomitant law. God alone is truly beyond responsibility, having no law beyond himself, being himself law, holiness, righteousness, and truth. For man to seek life beyond law, beyond good and evil, is to claim to be a god, and at the same time to abdicate manhood, which means capability and responsibility under God. The caretaker state is the refuge and liberation of these champions of anti-law. The caretaker state seeks to transcend or abolish history. It seeks to create the final and perfect order and usher man into paradise regained and regained without God. But to run from history is to run from responsibility, and to evade responsibility is to evade manhood. The religious and philosophical roots of this position are very extensive. John Dewey emphatically affirmed this war against law. Supernatural Christianity and democracy are inevitably enemies, as Dewey recognized. Any concept of an absolute law or justice, any standard in terms of which men were judged and separated as godly or wicked, as, quote, the saved and the lost, end quote, meant a, quote, spiritual aristocracy, end quote. Quote, "I cannot understand how any realization of the democratic ideal as a vital moral and spiritual ideal in human affairs is possible without surrender of the conception of the basic division to which supernatural Christianity is committed," end quote. Values are thus anti-democratic, as is school grading. Prisons condemn evil actions, which are seen as non-existent. Either mental rehabilitation must replace prisons, or, with anarchists, total democracy and have no condemnation whatsoever. War and nationalism are like values, divisive. They too must be eliminated, since nothing is worth fighting for, and every boundary and definition is inherently false. And in Miller's words, quote, "Morality is for slaves, beings without spirit. Evil does not exist," end quote. This too is the faith of theological neo-orthodoxy and existentialism. Thus, Karl Barth's doctrine of the quote-unquote freedom of God is God's ostensible freedom from law, from any eternal counsel, from the necessity to regard as holy tomorrow that which is deemed so today. Again, Barth's doctrine of quote-unquote election has strong implications of total democracy. The dynamic of his theology is the dynamic of relativism and change. As the United Presbyterian Church has stated it, quote, "It must be recognized anew that our God is a dynamic Lord, a truly unpredictable source of ongoing revelation," end quote. This, quote, ongoing revelation, end quote, being, quote, truly unpredictable, end quote, can call truth tomorrow that which is a lie for today. All values are thus relative, and being alone has reality. The total movement is thus anti-law, anti-value, and anti-meaning. For the insistence on meaning is a demand for rationality, logic, and predictability, things which by nature are said to be alien to God, and hence alien to reality. It is a source of triumph in the modern arts, therefore, to war against meaning. Thus, a poem should not mean, it is. To cherish law, value, and meaning is to be a Philistine and a vulgarian according to this inverse snobbery which wages war against everything which divides men in terms of an absolute standard. There is thus a democracy of meaning, a levelling of man and of institutions, and a subordination of all things to the idea of democracy and its organised form, the state. In terms of this faith, Conant can view the family as an institution which frustrates egalitarianism. Quote, wherever the institution of the family is still a powerful force, as it is in this country, surely inequality of opportunity is automatically and often unconsciously a basic principle of the nation. The more favoured parents endeavour to obtain even greater favours for their children. Therefore, when we Americans proclaim an adherence to the doctrine of equality of opportunity, we face the necessity for a perpetual compromise. Now, it seems to me important to recognise both the inevitable conflict and the continuing nature of the compromise. End quote. Conant perhaps sees a continuing compromise as needful in view of our cultural context. Others see no such need for compromise, and more consistently see the family as necessarily doomed if true democracy is to prevail. Another major source for this concept of total democracy is Albert Schweitzer, whose philosophy is, by his own affirmation, derived from the Enlightenment rather than Christianity. The philosophy of, quote, reverence for life, end quote, eliminates ethics by equalizing all being into a total democracy of life. It is Schweitzer's hope, having equalized being, that men will be loving, that they will respect and revere life in its every form. But he fails to see any law other than the total democracy of life. What Schweitzer has affirmed in his philosophy, Henry Miller has more consistently applied. He is, in his own words, religious, quote, without espousing any religion. That means simply having a reverence for life, being on the side of life instead of death. Again, the word quote-unquote civilization, to my mind, is coupled with death. When I use the word, I see civilization as a crippling, thwarting thing, a stultifying thing, end quote. Miller is one of a number of writers and artists who have applied the idea of total democracy with radical thoroughness. Others have talked of it while they have insistently lived it. Paris, with its continuing revolutionary ideology, is their homeland. Their literary forebears include men like Rimbaud, who sought, by systematic debauchery and homosexuality, to place himself beyond good and evil, to break down the control of reason and normal inhibitions, to be, in short, the damned of God, so that he might, by his illuminism, remake himself and humanity into the true God. Quote, I am he who will create God, end quote. Walt Whitman, who was not without his French inspiration as well as verbal affectations, salut au monde, répondez, allons, etc., affirmed the same faith and expressed his own perversion in verse. His denial of values and affirmation of total democracy is continuously in view, best known perhaps in, quote, to a common prostitute, end quote, quote, not till the sun excludes you do I exclude you, end quote. Nature is normative. All that has been is being and equally, quote-unquote, good, if such language can be used. Thus, in his poem, Walt Whitman, he expresses contempt for civilization, religion, property, and work, while delighting in animals because they are so placid and self-contained. In Répondez, he declares, quote, let faces and theories be turned inside out, let meanings be freely criminal as well as results. Let the earth desert God, nor let there ever henceforth be mentioned the name of God. Let there be no God, end quote. For Miller, Whitman was, quote, the first and the last poet, end quote. What Whitman called for, Miller became. He affirms a war on civilization, reason and logic. He hates cleanliness and righteousness. Miller's summons is to, quote, abdicate, scrap the past instantly, end quote. As against Jehovah, the great I Am, Miller declares, quote, I am, end quote, and his book is, quote, Not a book, end quote, but, quote, a prolonged insult, a gob of spit in the face of art, a kick in the pants to God, man, destiny, time, love, beauty, what you will, end quote. To all that law and civilization represent, he is a quote-unquote hyena, a scavenger waiting to destroy and devour its carcass. Hence his delight in affirming, quote, I am proud to say that I am inhuman, end quote. Hence too his delight in relating his sexuality, theft, and contempt for decency. Quote, I've liked only what is alien. Obscenity is a cleansing process, whereas pornography only adds to the murk. Whenever a taboo is broken, something good happens, something vitalizing, end quote. This is a demand for the primitive Saturnalia, the revitalization of society by the ritual return to chaos. This too is the rationale of revolution. Regeneration is to be achieved through the cleansing bloodbath of chaos. The return to paradise is through the destruction of history, meaning, and morality. The, quote, time of the assassins, end quote, must come again, a ruthless destruction of all things, so that a new world, characterized by anarchy, racial amalgamation, and universal human hermaphroditism, the births of male and female in every individual, may dawn. Anarchy and decay are thus approved. Not surprisingly, Miller speaks of meeting Emma Goldman, the anarchist, in 1913 as his, quote, turning point in life, end quote. Again, it is not surprising that the radical relativism of Far Eastern cultural collapse, Zen Buddhism, is influential among the thinkers of radical democracy. It is again not surprising that Miller, who once planned to write, quote, a new Bible, the last book, end quote, should declare also, quote, I would welcome the day when the film would displace literature, when there'd be no more need to read, end quote. This, then, is a religious faith, and Miller describes his acceptance of it as a rebirth preceded by a kind of crucifixion. Peace comes through a surrender of all standards, morality, religion, and selfhood. Quote, I believe in absolute freedom of expression, end quote. The test of a man's humanity lies in his acceptance of life, all aspects of life, not just those which correspond with his own limited viewpoint. As dear old, sadly misunderstood Nietzsche said, the yes-sayers, end quote. This means saying yes to every appetite and is a means of attaining salvation. This new religion alone will, quote-unquote, save man. Hence, an anthology of Miller's philosophy was compiled, a reader as a new quote-unquote Bible, with the suggestion of putting, quote, one in every hotel room in America, after removing the Gideon Bibles and placing them in the laundry chutes, end quote. Miller is the new and true, quote, holy man, end quote. White dreamed of a school using such a reader for, quote, the liberating and purifying effects these books have had upon young and old alike, end quote. For him, Miller is a, quote, Superman and prophet, end quote. For Peter P. Rode, Miller's mysticism will re-establish the link between human and divine, and Miller is to be compared to Buddha, Jesus, and St. Francis. Albert Maillet goes further, quote, his readers sometimes see in him a Christ, a God, and indeed there is a great deal of truth in this opinion, end quote. He is, quote, the appearance of a new type of man. We are reminded of the coming of Christ, end quote. Christ's prophecy is, quote, realized in the works of de Sade and Miller, end quote, which fulfill what the French and Russian revolutions failed to do. Maillet seems to apologize for the absence of a perversion in Miller, Whitman's homosexuality, but this is, quote, a simple question of temperament, end quote. Quote, in the end, divinity will be fully realized, not only in one man such as Miller, but in all mankind. I find the same kind of salvation prophesied in the gospel, end quote. The number of men who have made pilgrimages to Miller in Paris, Big Sur and Beverly Glen form an impressive list of notables of our time. Writers, artists, thinkers, and even political figures. University scholars have refused to testify against Miller, and many, such as Mark Schroer and Eugene Burdick, have testified in his favour, as did the United Presbyterian Professor of Systematic Theology at the San Francisco Theological Seminary, San Anselmo, California, Arnold Comey. Comey finds that Miller, quote, has, by his daring, contributed to a new freedom in American literature toward the very serious problems of sex and social conformity, end quote. What was this new freedom? Walt Whitman, in his old age, described his, quote, poetic method, end quote, as the, quote, notion of receptivity to experience and of a complete surrender to it, combined with a patient effort to grasp its deepest meaning, end quote. The background to this was not only the Enlightenment exaltation of man, but Romanticism's enthronement of experience. Darwin, Freud, and Jung furthered the developments by reading the significant area of experience back into the biological ancestry, the racial unconscious, and the individual unconscious. The new locus of infallibility, once resting in God and His Scripture, was now the unconscious, whose infallible word, in Freudian slips, asserted itself against the sickly and error-ridden consciousness of man. Many were quick to see, in spite of the illogical restraints imposed by their mentors, that the new freedom was, in Whitman's fashion, a complete receptivity and surrender to experience without any interposition of quote-unquote sickly restraints such as Christianity and its morality. The holy men of this faith, its desert fathers, became the quote-unquote beats, the blessed ones whose, quote, whole idea was to experience holiness, the beatific vision, orgiastic release, the crucifixion of the flesh, end quote. In terms of this faith, moral judgments with reference to perversions, Christian standards with reference to ultimate law, God's sovereignty and judgment, social judgments concerning narcotics and political hopes for justice are all aspects of the social lie and hindrances to either the physical or the, quote, metaphysical orgasm, end quote. Whores are, quote, the original hipsters, the outlaws, the outcasts, end quote. In terms of, quote, the gospel according to anthropology and prehistory, end quote, the old gods of civilization are all obsolete. The new God is in man's unconscious, not in his civilized accretions, and in terms of this, the writing of one, quote-unquote, beat on a mirror is to be understood. Quote, this is the face of God you see, end quote. Not immorality, but amorality is cultivated as, quote, the way, end quote. Another champion of the same faith is Allen Ginsberg, author of Howl, for Carl Solomon, who has sought experience in drugs and in sexual experimentation, and has expressed his contempt of civilized ways by public nakedness. At the trial of Ginsberg's Howl, academic notables were again arrayed on the side of the defense, Mark Schroer and others appearing to defend the author. Kenneth Rexroth, poet and San Francisco Examiner columnist, described Howl as quote-unquote prophetic writing comparable to that of the biblical prophets. The theme of Howl, according to Rexroth, is simply that, quote, everything that is human is holy to me, end quote, and that salvation rests, end quote, the love of everything holy in man, end quote. Herbert Blau of the San Francisco State College faculty described Howl as, quote, a vision that by the salvation of despair, by the salvation of what would appear to be perversity, by the salvation of what would appear to be obscene, by the salvation of what would appear to be illicit, is ultimately a kind of redemption of the illicit, the obscene, the disillusioned, and the despairing, end quote. Salvation is thus the total acceptance of all that biblical faith condemns, and the total rejection of biblical Christianity. Redemption is deliverance from God's sovereign law to man's law, to the totalitarian authority of the underground, the subconscious, the subversive, the outlaw, and the criminal. Relativism was manifest in the editing of the Webster's Third New International Dictionary in 1961, All usage was given almost equal status, so that standard English is in effect slighted. Ironically, one of the critics of this dictionary, which implicitly outlawed any preceptive teaching of English, was Mark Schroer, defender of the same principle in Miller and Ginsberg. This new faith was not without its immediate popularization in a variety of ways, as witness Ray Anthony's The Housewife's Handbook on Selective Promiscuity. Mrs. Anthony, quote, on the basis of her own extensive and intensive sex experiences, end quote, offers a handbook on the subject to others, and among other things writes, quote, unprudishly to indicate the advantages of anal stimulation and sexual varietism, end quote. This temper is championed in literature and life. Thus, William Carlos Williams, in his introduction to The Lover and Other Poems by Mimi Goldberg, 1961, declares, quote, a woman has to give herself without question when the mood is upon her. She cannot question herself what she is transcribing. End quote. As a result of this temper, we have what Nicanor Parra of Chile calls anti-poems. Academic poets, at times able to write lovely lyrics, turn increasingly to anti-poetry for their medium, as witness Theodore Rothke. Among students, this philosophical anarchism and relativism is widespread. This anarchism is, of course, closely related to statism. The denial of God's sovereignty and the affirmation of man's sovereignty, whether of rational or irrational man or of his unconscious being, denies transcendence and leaves only two realities, individual man and collective man. In the name of individual man, collective man, the state establishes its total order and absolute tyranny. This new faith is not limited to literature, but is also operative in the sciences, where Kinsey provides the most obvious instance. Kinsey, operating in terms of a democracy of values, was able to classify homosexuality and, quote, animal contacts, end quote, with normal marital sexual relations as equally valid since equally natural. Since nature is normative, no law beyond nature is admissible, and we have a new meaning given to deism's old faith that whatever is right. Total democracy means total quote-unquote equality, and the end of morality and values as divisive and aristocratic. The goal is total levelling. In the transitional stage for Marxism in its various forms, a dictatorship of the proletariat is necessary to eradicate God in history, and it is permitted as a means to the end. In the liberal tradition, the same hope for a dictatorship was expressed by Colonel Edward Mandell House, 1858 to 1938, in his political novel Philip Drew, Administrator, 1912. In various forms, the hope expresses itself. Science, education, wonder drugs and other human devices will invalidate differences and usher in total democracy. In education, grades are seen as divisive and anti-democratic in terms of this faith. In welfare, subsidy is the order of the day to equalize all. The excellence of the superior is an offence for which they must be taxed to reward the failure of others. Values are anti-democratic. But this new democracy has steadily created the most extreme aristocracy in history and the greatest cultural gap. As Diana Spearman has observed, quote, the century of the common man is distinguished by the most aristocratic culture that has ever existed, aristocratic in the sense that it has no popular roots and that the average Persian can neither understand nor enjoy it, end quote. Whether in painting, literature, music, or other areas, popular taste is despised by the artist and an esoteric art created demanding interpretation by experts only. Quote, all this may seem remote from politics, but submission to the demands of experts for only half-comprehended reasons makes people willing to accept the orders, legislation, or policy of any popularly elected government, end quote. Experts are elected and then meekly submitted to. The experts thus become a dictatorship of the proletariat, ostensibly guiding them for their own welfare. This new aristocracy, whose inverse snobbery is its contemptible Christian values in the name of anti-values, deliberately cuts itself off from the masses who are still wedded to meaning and to value. To cherish these is to be moral, Christian, a vulgarian and a Philistine, and no greater sin can exist in the eyes of this new Islam. Total war must be waged against God, against all meaning, value, morality, law and order. In short, against everything that divides men in terms of an absolute standard. It is productive of political chaos by its attack on the idea of law. This planned chaos characterized the first step of both the Russian and French revolutions and is the prelude to the new law of the total state. The role of Freud, who compared himself to Copernicus and Galileo, has been mentioned. Freud held belief in, quote, psychic freedom and choice, end quote, to be, quote, quite unscientific, end quote, and his followers have been characterized by, quote, their relative freedom from concern about the ethical implications of their central positions, end quote. In terms of this studied irresponsibility, quote, a vast reorganization of the world, end quote, is demanded by many psychiatrists and champions of, quote, mental health, end quote. A more basic influence has been that of Darwin, whose evolutionary hypothesis provided a framework for assault on orthodox Christian faith and a free market economy, to the Union League advocates of radical reconstruction in the South, to John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, and the various industrialists who bypassed old-fashioned Christianity, constitutionalism and capitalism with their neo-mercantilism. Evolution is a genetic faith and makes the prior, which is the primitive, determinative. The primitive is more basic, hence more vital and real. It follows, therefore, that sex is more important than religion, since sex appears early on the evolutionary ladder and religion is a latecomer. Rationality is thus less significant than emotion, since rationality is a late arrival. Hence, Miller regards movies as superior to books and hopes to eliminate books. Some also hold monogamy to be a late quote-unquote arrival, hence true sexuality is possible, the quote-unquote beats assert, in an anti-moral, anti-Christian context as amorality rather than immorality. Genetic psychology explains reason by emotion and emotion by the subconscious. It explains civilized man by primitive man, man in general by animals, and animals by the evolutionary process. The result is what Cornelius Van Til has aptly termed, quote, integration into the void, end quote. As Miller stated it, quote, you see, I think it's bad to think, end quote. Man is dissolved into the void and into the arms of the caretaker state. The result is a democracy of tyranny. Divisions are intolerable. Man cannot be separated from one another. Nothing is worth fighting for. The new Tower of Babel is in process. As against this, the only refuge and strength of man is in the sovereignty of God and his infallible word, in the absolute law of God. We are either believers in this God, or we take a road which leads to radical and total democracy. The weakness of the United States today is its halfway position, a stand lacking the strength of either faith. The irreverence and judgment of the lukewarm was long ago indicated by Christ, quote, so then, because thou art lukewarm and neither cold nor hot, I will spew thee out of my mouth, end quote. Revelation 3:16.